Okay, so welcome to Courageous Conversations, everyone. It's the last one for a while, and that's because I have good news. We are expecting a little girl in the next couple of weeks or days. So we are, so we're not going to have Courageous Conversations, but that doesn't mean that we can't stop thinking about things and engaging. So it's good to see you, Ken.
Well, thank you, Justin, and wonderful time of life for you and the family, and hope and pray everything goes well. It will be joyous and challenging in equal measure. Yeah,
I think it's challenging in the beginning, but they have to live with me for quite a while, so they got the short end of a stick.
And that challenge will go on for them.
Oh, I tell you. Great. So, Ken, we were thinking about talking about just some what's happening in the world at the moment, just our thoughts on that. Also, just where we've been a bit with these conversations and what we've learned. So I think it's really important that at the moment we're in Holy Week, that we acknowledge that. We're recording in Holy Week, and I'm always fascinated about the Holy Week, about the progression from Palm Sunday to Good Friday, and even Easter Saturday. The progression is you have people waving palms and welcoming Jesus in, and really excited for Jesus to come in, and they're screaming Hosanna, like, you are the Christ, you are the one that's going to come save us, you are the one that's going to overturn this Roman Empire. They throw their coats on the floor. You know, there's references to old kings. There's the palm leaves. There's the reference to Maccabeus. You know, there's this big kind of move that they have an expectation of Jesus as he comes riding in. And yet, 5 days later, they kill him. They have a choice to free him. And they say, well, actually, we'd rather have him dead. And so, for me, I wonder how Jesus disappointed them.
You know, I used to find Palm Sunday one of the most difficult Sundays to prepare for. Partly the music that we sang tended to be fairly limited in the sense that there were some traditional Palm Sunday songs that you can only sing them once a year, so you have them. The reading, pretty much, it's the reading. There's no choice really. There's not a lot of wriggle room. So you have the story of Palm Sunday from the Gospels and the Zechariah prophecy, etc. But and then after the theme, well, Jesus coming in peace. He comes on a donkey. So you think, right, once you've said that Jesus is coming in peace, and that's the symbolism of the donkey, well, where'd you go? You've got to think, right, what? And I did this 41 times. So maybe I deserve some kind of long service medal for that one. But somehow or other, like so many biblical stories, something kind of eventually came out. Inspiration is next to desperation. You think you have to find something, but there are worthwhile themes about it. And you're right. The whole thing is such a paradox when you've got this enthusiastic crowd, but then crowds are notoriously fickle. I think that's true the world over. Neil Lennon was a successful football manager for Celtic, and after a few bad games or just a few weeks, and he's out in his ear. You think and he's got fans yelling abuse at him. So you go from hero to zero very, very quickly. Made worse by modern media, but the characteristic and the dynamic is there. If you put anyone or anything on a pedestal, boy, the fall comes hard and fast. So they kind of put Jesus on a pedestal, I guess, with their own expectations, their own thoughts, which were not his thoughts, and that reforming of people's expectations and hopes is such a challenge. It's the hardest thing to change.
Yeah,
plastic surgery is much easier.
Yeah, and what gets me about that story, maybe, and I'm journeying with Jesus on the donkey a little bit, and is in what ways do I paint a picture of God that is not realistic, that is actually more damaging to me than it is helpful. It's easy for me to assume that I wouldn't be the person crying in the crowd, crucify. But to be honest, if somebody disappointed me enough, I'm sure I would be like, I want them gone. So
Yeah, yes, I'm sure that's right. If it was the same crowd, of course, there's an argument as to, there were obviously traditional forms of greeting pilgrims who were streaming into Jerusalem for the festival. Was it the same people? Well, it must have been some of the same people, and I think undoubtedly, as you say, being the Messiah who wanted to come in peace and be open to all, and not just see himself as a national hero, but as someone for the world, is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, to allow people to open up their hands to include others, to be open to a different way of thinking, a new form of faith. God was not just the champion of Israel. God is, an all-loving God for the whole world, and letting other people in to your good thing, whatever your good thing is sometimes a big. It requires heart surgery for some people.
Yeah. Well, good news is not always good news for everyone.
Yeah.
It's difficult. So, Kenneth, has there ever been a moment in your life where you've been disappointed by God?
Well, it's interesting the way you phrased the question, Justin. There's been profound moments of sadness and disappointment, and things that you think shouldn't have happened. I've spoken before. I think I've mentioned to you, when I had a 19-year-old sister who died. After 6 months, she had some kind of growth cancer in her brain, something that was a bombshell to the whole family, and felt, very, very disappointing. How did that must have had? We were quite a fairly religious, not extreme, but we were, a kind of middle of the road, but, sincere Christian religious family, and it just seemed all wrong. You just think this is a horrible injustice. Why should this happen? But that's universal, isn't it? Why bad things happen to good people, and so many worse things have happened to other people. So disappointed by God, and that's about expectations, isn't it? It's about, and I think I read somewhere, I forget who said it, that one of the greatest causes of human unhappiness is unrealistic expectations. And so if you do have this image of God as somebody who fixes things, who pulls strings, who changes the laws of physics and the laws of psychology.
The Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
Doing the levers at the behind the curtain.
Yeah, well, yes. You think, well, if that is your kind of mechanistic view of a God who's going to look after me, and that other person over there who maybe doesn't believe in God or is not quite so good in the moral sense, why would God be partial? So I don't see the world as something in which God is causing all these interactions to happen. I think we understand purposes by reading what happens and how it looks. But it's our impression of God that I think is more at fault rather than anything else.
For me, I'm starting to see disappointment. You talk about unrealistic expectation. I'm starting to see it as a bit of a spiritual discipline. It's for looking at the ways that God disappoints me, not because I want my heart broken and I'm a bit sadistic like that, but more it's where I've placed unrealistic expectations on the image of God. And it's when there's that dissonance, where there's that confusion, the unknown, that's where the greatest growth happens. That's where you start to see things move. It starts to pull your thought patterns. It starts to open you up. It starts to try and resolve itself. And I think it's really important, because sometimes we can place the blame in other places, and instead of trying to find a solution or find the right questions to unlock it.
I think many elements of religious faith, I must include myself in this, but I'm not sure quite how or where, but religious faith is often an exercise in taking responsibility away from the individual. To say, well, I can blame God, or I can blame others, or I can blame evil. There's a great one. Satan's in the world, so all these bad things are happening because of Satan or some kind of power of evil. When actually that is a kind of retreat from reality, and it's a retreat from responsibility. Actually, it may be that things have gone wrong just because things go wrong, you know, as they say. I maybe don't want to say it out loud, but SHIT, you know, does happen. So you think, well, you know, and that's the world we live in. You know, just bad things happen. Okay, deal with it. You know, suck it up. But on the other hand, sometimes bad things happen because of choices that we've made, and that's clear. I think we all know that. So, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can or should blame God in any particular way, though people do. But I sometimes think that's maybe just a little bit of a reversal. They should be thinking, well, stop projecting it away from yourself and just think, well, just deal with it. And how do we deal with it? And maybe we have a responsibility.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, I continue a little bit. I agree with you on that as well. I wonder if Jesus on the cross also gets disappointed with God a little bit. You know, my God, why have you forsaken me? Like, I wonder if that's a cry of like, you know, why, you know, look at this. Look at this. I wonder if that moment Jesus is just like,
it's such a poignant moment, isn't it? And it's such a powerful and unexpected phrase. I mean, you know, for even for the gospel writers to decide to remember and include, because it's so challenging. You know, that you know, the figure that we are, that has become projected as God incarnate, which to me is some kind of representative statement. I don't take that in any sense literally, but you know, it is still. That is the figure that is being described by the gospel writers and believed in by the early Christian community. And you still have this sense of almost betrayal, you know, and that is a powerful thing. And you could therefore argue, well, if that's how Jesus felt, well, you know, we shouldn't be too surprised or upset when sometimes we feel like that.
Yeah. But as I said earlier, I think it's that dissonance that creates the growth. And even with ourselves, so there's an introspective look at that. Saying like, what's caused this dissonance? But also there's an expectation and an openness and an honesty. Often, in my experience, Christianity has not always been the place of honesty. It's shied away from honesty and replaced it with cheap answers to really hard questions. You know, we accuse atheists of creating a God scarecrow that then they beat up. But the reality is that Christians have done the same. Is we've put a scarecrow God into really terrible into situations that doesn't even stand up to even a bit of prodding.
I'm sure a lot of Christian people have the reaction when they hear what God it is that atheists have rejected. Then many of us would want to say, yeah, we reject that God too. And people are unwilling or ignorant of any kind of alternative image or belief around what God is or might be, and reshaping that. I mean, it's really hard to leave these things behind. I like the image of all the various things that we leave behind growing up as children. You know, most families have got an attic or a garage full of junk, of things that the children used to use. You know, whether it's toys or clothes or games or all sorts of things. And adults have as well things that you used to have as an enthusiasm. You know, but I mean, I had a stair cupboard full of squash rackets at one stage. You know, you think, well, okay, and other things.
Yeah, the bamboo ones that you could flick, or the cane ones that you could flick. Those kind of squash rackets.
No, we beat the carpet with that.
Okay.
But you know, so you think, but you know, there's all sorts of things that were like Scripture says. You know, we look in a mirror, and you know, when we were a child, we thought and acted as a child, and then we grow up. There's a kind of growing process, and we leave certain childish things behind, different ideas of childhood. Our ideas of our own parents change, for goodness sake. I mean, you know, when you're a child, you think your parents are all powerful, and you probably think they're all good. And then as you get older, you realize actually they're flawed human beings. They made mistakes. Sometimes they did things that, you know, as an adult, you would look back on and think, well, maybe that wasn't quite right. It's compromising. And there are ideas of, there are Christian ideas, I think, that we leave behind, and that we think, that wasn't positive. That is no longer my reality. Although other people may be living with those beliefs, but not me anymore. And
but that's sometimes a hard place to come to, because sometimes leaving something you've grown up with, if you've been missold PPI, you know, or PP, whatever it is, But if you've been missold Christianity and your whole life is built around that misselling, it's difficult to walk away, because it could mean strained family relationships. It could mean, loss of friends. It could mean so many things to so many people. I mean, maybe not so much in Scotland, where the conversation is a little, the community is more secular, for a terrible word, but it's more secular. But in places like America and South Africa, leaving a religious belief set behind is really difficult.
Well, I remember many years ago wanting to say something where I kind of was putting forward the idea that the basic and most central idea in Christian faith was not to deal with the devil, and that maybe the devil was an image, or was a metaphor, or I would say there is evil in the world, but I'm not wanting to personify it and deify it. And I knew that there were some people in my congregation who were very keen on the devil as an idea, because that made sense of it for them. That was what everything was focused against. It was the whole purpose of this whole, blood, death, dying, atonement kind of set of ideas that then flowed from that. And if you took that away, they didn't know what it was about. There was nothing left, and I would say, well, actually, if on the kind of Room 101 basis that people are putting away things that they don't like or don't want or dislike, I think there's a theological Room 101 for me, and one of the first things that would go into it would be the idea of some kind of deified, personified force of evil, Satan, devil, or old Nick, or whatever. That seems to me to have no relevance and no place in the world. It doesn't make sense to me, but for some people it is absolutely central.
Yeah. And for me, Jesus on the cross, Paul talks about Christ crucified. First that rolls off the tongue kind of easily, but that's quite a big statement. Like God dying, like you kill God in that sense. God killing God. Yeah.
And God taking an innocent person of his own kind, and regarding that as justice to kill somebody innocent. That seems to me to be slightly perverse.
Yeah. But the thing for me about Easter, that kind of narrative of like, it's a time where we get to reinterpret God, because even the disciples, they didn't expect what was going to happen. The woman at the grave didn't expect the outcome that they got. They didn't receive Jesus the way they thought they would receive Jesus. And for me, maybe Easter is about reclaiming a little bit of the kind of mystery of God, saying that God shows up in the least expected ways. And maybe our theology needs to have more mystery to allow for these encounters. Maybe our lives has to be more open to the mystery that God is going to show up, and it's not in the way you thought. Even Christ crucified is a bizarre statement.
Yeah, and again, interpreting events, I do think there's a strong historical core to all the gospel stories, but the way that the gospel stories are interpreted and presented, I think, has got theological spin, if you like. It's been put there by the early Christian community to reflect the beliefs that had evolved and to reflect their own particular needs. And we just want to be sure that, as you say, I think the whole story is there for a community, the community of Israel, the Jewish people of the day, being challenged to re-understand, to get a new interpretation of the story, even of their own story. And that must be a process that's ongoing.
Yeah. Good. I think it's interesting this time of Easter. The thing I'm also interested about at the moment is women's rights. And I understand that we're talking about this as two white males, so it goes a bit against the grain. But Sarah Everard kidnapped in London, taken and killed. Big protests.
There's a report today on the police handling of the Clapham Common, wasn't it? Demonstrations.
Yeah.
They don't think the police overreacted, but
and it's just, I think, what has gotten under my skin a bit, and under my skin in a good way. like a splinter that gets under your skin and causes you uncomfort that you can't wear a shoe, is how often men are perpetuating violence. And there is that narrative like, oh, it's not all men. And I can understand that. I understand that, because deep down that is trying to say, I'm not like that. And I'm not like that kind of person that would do that. But I have been privy in my life to many locker room conversations. I've seen the image of women being demeaned in the church. I've seen it being demeaned in society. I've seen men behave in meetings really ugly to women. And all the women were asking for was equality in the meeting, and I think to myself, we've got to do better here as men. We've really got to step up here and start hearing these stories and holding other men accountable, even in the small ways that we see prejudice every single day.
Well, you're absolutely right. We are both male and we're both white, and also, I mean, I have a wife and a daughter, and obviously in the church, lots of women that I have listened to with many issues of all kinds, and you kind of get a bit more of an insight, clearly. But I don't know whether it's got worse or whether it's got better. I mean, there's an argument for the social media thing. I think has made all kinds of irreverent and horrible talk has just become it's become a disease that's become rife. It's an epidemic. I was reading recently a book talking about the Elizabethans, Andrew Marr's book, and talking about in the 50s, when Queen Elizabeth II, as we call her, came to the throne. The images of pornography were very rare. And now images of pornography can be everywhere and readily accessible on all kinds of media. And you think, if that's what young boys are looking at, and if that particularly, I'm thinking, obviously, maybe there must be an equivalent for girls, but it doesn't seem to work quite the same. If they're looking at that, the way that women are depicted and the way that they're treated and the way that if that becomes part of their culture and it's normalized, then apart from the unnatural level of arousal that must result from that, and the fantasy world that they must get engaged in and maybe addicted to, maybe it's not entirely surprising, although it's horrible, but maybe it's not entirely surprising that sometimes they want to act that out when it comes to their conduct towards women. It's I don't know how you could put that genie back in the bottle, but I reckon there's an element in that.
Yeah, well, even in the Church of Scotland, now I would call us more on the progressive end. I mean, on the whole, I think we're more like we're trying to work on these kind of issues. But when you go to apply to be a minister in the Church of Scotland, you go to a conference and they ask you two questions. Do you believe in infant baptism? And do you believe that women should be ministers? It's 2021 and they're still asking the question whether we think women should have equal place in the church.
Why?
Well, for them, it's to weed it out. But even in some pulpits in Scotland, in the Church of Scotland, a woman is not allowed to get into because the minister says that they're not allowed to get into it. I know stories of women who held really high esteemed positions in the church and been denied to preach in pulpits around the country. So even there's a sexism in that. And there's within the Church of Scotland, the Church of Scotland's 500 years old, about that. Women have only been represented in eldership for 50, something like that. Women ministers 50 years, and elders maybe 75, something like that, to that effect. I don't know the exact things. But that's still 400 years where they've not been allowed to influence policy. In 1980, a woman prayed in the Church in the General Assembly about to Mother God, and that caused a huge outcry in the church. And I wonder if we still prayed Mother God in our churches, how much outcry there'd still be. To personify God as female, I think sort of dictates our sexism.
Yeah, I like the thought that we should do that. When the most recent Church of Scotland hymn book came out, there was a hymn in it that talked about the Spirit of God as being described God in female terms. And I had a colleague at the time when it first came out said it was a dreadful book and should never be used, and how dare they? And was very much into the fatherhood of God and God being male. Is that? Obviously it's related, but I'm not sure. It's interesting. Some churches obviously have it institutionalized. It's in their the articles, the basic articles of the Catholic Church. You cannot possibly have a female priest, and you think, well, that's not a good beginning. Although recently, I believe they appointed a nun to some board of the Catholic Bank or something. It was she had some remarkable appointment, which has really upset some of the most conservative Catholics. I can't remember exactly who she is or what she was appointed to, but I know it was quite significant recently. But women it's funny because women have always been the majority in the church. You see, if you watch songs of praise or other recorded music, you see the camera scanning the congregation, and it's the exceptional face that's male, and not just 3/4, probably 90% of the congregation tend to be female. And yet you've got this predominance about male power in committees and in appointments.
Yeah.
So we have to, that needs to change, but sometimes
it's a difficult thing. In 2019, the Church of Scotland set up this board that was going to run the managerial part of the church, and it was pointed out there were too many men on this board, and it went to a vote, and the women lost. They were told to, that women didn't deserve an equal place at the table, which is, even now, women are still disproportionately not represented on that board. So
there was a recent case in Tokyo, wasn't there, where the man who was the senior Japanese politician who was in charge of the Tokyo Olympics Committee made some comment about not wanting women because they talk too much. It did cause an outcry. The good thing is there is an outcry. People are now questioning it and responding to those kind of attitudes.
Yeah, but I think the job for each and every male and I would say every religious person is to respect the dignity of women. In Genesis, one of the founding principles about humanity and the Bible trying to tell us about how we should understand our sexuality and our gender, and it says that we are created both male and female in the image of God, and that's not always been true.
It's not true in practice at all. But then there are, Jesus obviously having women in his closer group, the women first at the tomb. We're talking about the Easter themes. It's astonishing that the Gospels, give women the pride of place in terms of the unveiling of the Easter story and the discovery of Jesus and the encounters with Jesus. So, Christianity was a revolutionary faith. It challenged authority, it challenged the status quo. Of course, it all changed when Constantine came along and adopted Christianity for whatever reason. So, suddenly we became different. We became the establishment and the oppressors, and not the ones being oppressed.
Yeah, I once preached a sermon about Mary, and I said, the creeds we have, we never, ever, ever speak about Mary's strength, but we do speak about her sexual purity. And I think that tells something about the way we represent women in the church, that we need to start talking about that depth of strength rather than her sexuality or her lack of sexual.
Well, don't get me started on the creeds, because the creeds, to my mind, totally misrepresent.
Yeah, but those are important for a lot of people.
Yes, yeah.
Good. So another thing I realize that we're speaking a lot is the churches in Scotland sued the Scottish government. Well, not all churches, a select few, and of a religious persuasion, maybe more right fundamental churches sued the Scottish government and won. There's a whole lot of caveats to that winning. That the church that the government illegally overstepped its boundary by asking churches to close over the lockdown. And thoughts?
Yeah, well, interesting, wasn't it? I mean, the Church of Scotland was keen to distance itself from those who are making that initiative, and we're keen to say we are keeping the rules and we're abiding by the law rather than challenging the law. I mean, it does go back to some kind of fairly arcane stuff, I guess, that goes back to the Reformation about the Church's relationship to the state. I'm no expert on that. And as you rightly say, first of all, it wasn't the church, the main churches, it was a specific group of individuals. And secondly, the ruling did not say you therefore ought to meet or you should meet or you can ignore regulations or restrictions. There were many qualifications and caveats, but yeah. My view of that is that I think the church should lead by example. I think it's an example, and the example, if other people, because of public safety and health concerns, are having to forego all kinds of things that matter profoundly to them, then Christians should be, even if we didn't have to legally, I think Christians should say, we stand with you, and we would forego this right. I think the challenge I think it came over to the non-religious public as being rather self-centered and special pleading. And I didn't like the initiative and I don't like the result.
For me, it almost, the subtext to suing the government for me is this idea that COVID's not going to walk through our doors because we pray. And it doesn't mean that we don't have to wear masks or we don't have to socially distance or we're special because we have Jesus on our side. And, and in some ways that action is so irresponsible because I've buried people who've broken lockdown rules. I've buried people who've been strict on the lockdown rules. I've seen how COVID has gone through this community, gone through society. And I think it's incredibly irresponsible. And I think it is not loving your neighbor as you love yourself.
I'm a little bit vexed too at this special pleading, as I mentioned the word before, but that somehow meeting for worship is in some way totally different in tenor and content to anything else that human beings do. And I don't believe that. It is a meeting of people. It is a social gathering. It's other things as well. I don't mean it's only that, but what religions would it apply to? And if it applies to all religions, what belief sets would it apply to? If you've got there will be. I know how upsetting it has been for elderly groups, particularly elderly groups where they're dealing with clients who've got dementia, are terribly, terribly disturbed and upset by the changes and lacking the human contact and companionship. I guess it's just as important for them. I don't think we're doing anything for God. this idea that somehow worship is a performance to amuse God, and worship has got to be a certain way, and God always wants to be flattered and praised and told how wonderful He is. I just think that's a rather bizarre concept.
God needs His ego boosted.
Yes, yeah. So who is it about? Who's this really about? I'm taking us back to our last theme about worship. Is it? It's so often just about ourselves and what we want and what we need. And it's often not particularly focused on God, and it's certainly not focused on changing our views and challenging our lifestyles.
Yeah, I wonder if it's in some ways worship in that context becomes a fix, like a drug addict needing its fix. And we need to get into worship. A lot of people need their fix, their daily fix, because otherwise it's not real.
Well, yes, you could, and I guess you could, if people felt really isolated and lonely, they might think, well, churches are allowed to meet, I'm going to go to church. They might not do it for any religious interest or reason at all. It's just a question of, well, somewhere to go, isn't it? At root, quite, some attend worship for that reason anyway. We just don't always recognize it. But no, I thought it was a slightly misconceived initiative. And whatever the legal situation, it's not a question of what's legal. I want to do what's right. Is it safe? And to stand with the wider community and other groups and say, we understand and we'll go through this too.
Yeah, I just think sometimes we're called to go beyond the law. Yeah.
Yes.
So, this is like maybe the part where you carry the soldier's pack 2 miles. Yeah. So, good. Ken, anything else you want to bring up? Are you happy?
No, that's great, Justin. And again, just to say that I know you've got one ear listening for a text message or a call from the house. So just on behalf of anybody else who might be listening, to wish you and Leslie well for the outcome of a new arrival in your family. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am very blessed in the community I live. And I use that term, blessed, as a real thing, is that there are so many lovely people around and very caring, and you're one of them. So thank you for just being a good friend and just for your insights into the world. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's great to have these times with you, Justin. As we've said before, we support each other.
Yeah. So, friends, we'll be back hopefully within the next 2 months, all being well. But as always, comments and questions, really just anything that you have it comes like a spark that you'd like to have a conversation about, just drop it in the comment section, leave a like, share, and if you could do one thing while we're away, just share this with someone else, give it to a friend and say, hey, what's your perspective? Start the conversation, and we look forward to meeting again. Keep safe.
Bye-bye.